You will have already completed the online questionnaire and that you have your report, or at least have your 5 letters and the name of your type handy. You don't have to have your report, but it's useful if you've already seen it. So we'll be using the 16 personalities questionnaire to look at what your behavioural preferences are. We'll look at the detail of what the results mean so that you have an increased understanding of your self-awareness. Because, it's one thing to read the report, but to actually understand it is another thing. So, of course, you can use, that knowledge to help you to understand other people's behavioural preferences and to help you work with others. And when you know what your preferences are, we can look at how you might flex those preferences so that you can take advantage of the full range of behaviours. Now, there's no point in being self-aware if you can't use that knowledge. So we will finish off with looking at some sample interview questions. And there won't be questions on your 16 personalities, but on how maybe you like to work with others, how you like to work for yourself, how you like to organize yourself. All of those things come under this sort of self-awareness. Okay, so as I said to you, we're going to be looking at the 16 personalities questionnaire. Hopefully you've already completed it. That's the link to it there, and we will pop it into the chat later on. If you have your report and you've read it, that's great. Hopefully you've found it very interesting, but it's also quite a complicated report. It's got quite a lot of layers to it. So what I'm going to try to do is to show you how the report is made up, to give you a better understanding of you and an understanding of why other people behave as they do. Because it's one thing to know that you behave in a particular way, but it's really useful to understand that other people have different preferences to you and therefore will behave in different ways as well. If you haven't already done the questionnaire and got your report, I wouldn't recommend that you try to quickly do it now. It takes a fair wee bit of time to do it. So I would say much better to follow along with the session today, do the questionnaire afterwards, which, as I said, we'll give you the link to, but that's essentially the link on the screen now. And then you can look over the slides again if you need any more detail. But even if you haven't done the questionnaire, you will be able to follow along with today's session. You just get more out of it if you have already done the questionnaire. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do something very simple for me, and this is where I would hope that if you can get your hands on a pen or pencil and a piece of paper in front of you, this is when you need it now. So, very simply, I'm going to ask you just to write your signature. I'll give you a moment to do that. Hope everybody's scribbling away. Okay, so if you've done that, now I'm simply going to ask you to do the same thing. So write your signature again, but this time with your other hand. So your non-preferred hand. And now I'd be really grateful if you could maybe tell me how it felt writing with your preferred hand. So first time that you wrote your signature, how did that feel? What sort of words come to you? Pop them into the chat there for me. Easy. Comfortable. Couple of people with comfortable, automatic, controlled, flowing. Yeah, great. Easy, yeah. Oh, I'm losing track. You're being very good about interacting with me. Thanks very much for that. So again then, and there's confidence. Again there, then, whenever you used your non-preferred hand, what sort of words come to you then? How did that feel, writing with your non-preferred hand? It felt wrong. Odd, yeah. Stiff and weird. Uneasy. Yep, I can see all that. Great. Difficult, wobbly, disastrous. Oh dear, that's not so good and not clear. Okay, really good. Thanks again for interacting with me there. And unusual, yep. So normally the sort of answers that I'd be getting, and they're pretty much the same as the sort of things you've been putting in there anyway. But the things that I would regularly hear whenever I do this exercise with people is with your preferred hand, it feels natural. And those sort of words, flowing and comfortable, you give to me there. You don't have to think about it. It looks like your signature. So you would recognize it as your signature. It's quick, effortless, easy, and recognizably your work. And then with your non-preferred hand, again, those sort of words that spring up all the time. Unnatural, awkward, requires more concentration to do it, takes more effort. And that's what I want you to really think about. Something that, requires more concentration, takes a bit more effort, and requires more energy to do as well, and not recognizable as your signature. Okay, so it's very important to remember that when we're looking at these 5 different spectrums in our questionnaire, so hopefully you have your report, you have your different letters there, and each of those letters are across a different spectrum. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about these spectrums. What you're actually looking at there are your preferences. So your preference tells you what you find most energizing and comfortable. Just like whenever you used your preferred hand, you didn't have to work hard at it. It was something that came naturally to you. And that's what a preference is. And that's what you're seeing in the results of your questionnaire. So your personality type does not determine the skills or ability. And this is very important to remember and why we don't use this for selection purposes. So you shouldn't really have to do anything like this whenever you're applying for a job, for example, because what the preferences show is that you prefer to do something in a certain way. It doesn't actually say that you're particularly good at it. Okay, so you might prefer to write with your right hand, doesn't mean you're a particularly good writer. Okay, and also, there's no such thing as right or wrong or a good or bad type. So, whatever type that you have, and there'll be 16 different ones of them, whichever one that you have, it's not the right one or the wrong one, it's not good or bad. And importantly, as well, everyone is able to use all of the preferences. So, it's not about sort of putting you into a particular box and saying that's where you stay now. Remember, you can use your non-preferred hand if you need to. And chances are, if you had to, say you fractured your wrist or something horrible like that, and you had to use your non-preferred hand, yes, it would be awkward. It might take you a while to get used to it, but eventually you'd get more comfortable with doing it and you would recognize that signature as well. You still prefer to get back to your normal preferred hand, but you can use it if you want to. It will require you to be conscious of doing it. It will require you to, use more energy and take more of your effort to be able to do it, but you can do it. And that's important to remember that everyone is able to use all of the preferences. What you're doing is identifying what your preferences are, not saying, but I can't do the other end of things. So your report basically looks at 4 different spectrums and then decides which side of the spectrum you are on based on your answers in the questionnaire. And it gives you a letter to indicate that. So this is where you get your first 4 letters from. So introvert, extrovert, that's your I and E. Observant or intuitive, and that is your S and your N. Thinking and feeling, T and F, judging and prospecting, J and P, and then assertive and turbulent. And that 5th one, the assertive and turbulent spectrum, is slightly different and indicates whether you use your style, so therefore your first 4 letters, in an assertive or a turbulent way. So even just looking at that slide, you may be ISTJ, and all of you could be that for all I know, but some of you might be ISTJ A or ISTJT. That's just the way it works. You'll use the 4 letters and then you'll be either A or T as well. And now I'm going to go through the different spectrums basically. So let's look at the first set of letters for introvert and extrovert. Generally, when I am doing these sessions for small teams, I would have knowledge of your report. So, I'd ask you to do your report beforehand or your questionnaire beforehand, and then send me your results basically. So I would know how many introverts we have in the team, how many extroverts. But I don't have that knowledge today. We have a pretty big group today, and I'm just doing it more as a knowledge based thing rather than as a group or a team exercise. But often that is what I would use these questionnaires for whenever we're working with teams to be able to give people information about not just themselves, but also people in the team as well, because it's a good demonstration of the differences between people and the different preferences that people have. But as I say, I don't have that knowledge. I'm going to assume that we are fairly evenly split. But please feel free to pop, into the chat what your type is if you're happy to do that. I don't need to know it, but you know, absolutely fine to be able to do that. Is there an issue, Mary, that needs dealt with? I'm not quite sure there. So the first one then, introvert and extrovert, how we like to interact with our environment. What does that mean? Well, for one thing, in terms of noise in a group, it usually takes two introverts to make up the noise level of one extrovert. Okay, so we've got quite a few introverts there. This can be quite good for the introverts actually to have it as an online experience rather than a real life one. So are I and E introvert and extrovert? And I'm glad because it means that you've been doing the questionnaire, so that's great. Okay, so the detail then of what introvert and extrovert is. So again, this aspect shows how we interact with our surroundings. Um, Introverted individuals prefer solitary activities. Now, remember, it is a spectrum and you aren't necessarily at either end of the spectrum. So it doesn't mean, again, that we're just putting you into that box. You'll flex between these. But this is sort of a roundup of the typical preferences. So introverted individuals prefer solitary activities and get exhausted by social interaction. So the more that you're having to deal with other people, the more exhausting that can be. They tend to be quite sensitive to external stimulation. So you might be more annoyed by sight or, sounds in general. And then the extroverted individuals prefer group activities and get energized by social interaction. So you might be more likely to have preferred to do this as a real life session rather than an online one. They tend to be more enthusiastic about things and more easily excited than introverts. Okay. So just a little bit more on it then. So extroverts like to talk things through. They tend to be more expressive than introverts. They lose energy when there's little interaction. So extroverts actually need to be interacting with people to keep their energy going. And they may talk over other people because they have to get what they want to say out there. Introverts like to think things through rather than talk things through. They want to think it through. They tend to be more contained, so less expressive than extroverts. And they lose energy when there's little space for reflection. So they need time to themselves to reflect on things. You don't necessarily know that you're going off to try and reflect on something. You just know that you need time away from people to be on your own. And they tend to wait in turn for, in the conversation. They tend not to butt in, but to wait for their turn in the conversation. So that's our introverts and extroverts. So the second pairing then is observant and intuitive. And just to confuse us, they use the letters S and N for this. And this is based on the MBTI questionnaire. Or the 16 personalities questionnaire is based on the MBTI questionnaire, which is a very popular questionnaire. And they obviously didn't want to move away from those sort of famous familiar letters, even though some of the words that they use are different. So that's why the S and N doesn't exactly fit with what you would expect to be O. Can't use the I again because they've used that for introvert, but as I say, just to confuse us slightly. So observant and intuitive, or S&N, is about where we direct our mental energy. So what does that mean then? So the second aspect determines how we see the world and process information. So observant individuals, highly practical, pragmatic, down-to-earth people, tend to have strong habits and they focus on what is happening or has already happened. Therefore, they're looking at the present or things that have already happened, not the future, not what might happen. Intuitive individuals, more imaginative, open-minded, more curious about things, and they prefer novelty over stability. So you can see those, they're pretty much two opposites there, and focus on hidden meanings and future possibilities. So they're all about what might happen in the future rather than what's going on in the present. So again, just a few more little pointers around those. So the observant individual then, they're all about the facts. They want specifics. They want things that are based in reality. So they're very realistic. And they're all about the here and now and what's practical. Your intuitive individuals then, they're all about the ideas, about the big picture, more imaginative, more sort of looking towards the future and anticipating the future, what might happen in the future, and they're more theoretical rather than practical. Okay, so another little activity for you. Just an exercise, and I haven't really tried to do this online much before. So it's just really to give you an opportunity to see if we can spot any differences. So I want you to take 2 minutes to tell me about an apple. Now, you're welcome to pop some notes into the chat if you want to, or just think about it and what you would say about an apple. But do take a couple of minutes to think about it. I'm going to stick on my timer. Mary, while people are thinking about that, is there anything I need to address? Or
no, I think it was too great. I asked that they log off and log back on again and see. I'm not sure. Nothing is popping up to be approved, so I'm not sure why they can't see the screen. But anyway, I think it's. Can you see now? Tugay, are you on? But no, there's nothing you need to do, Róisín.
okay. Anybody like to pop any thoughts into the chat? Okay. Don't want to read them out. I don't want to give people ideas about what to write. All right, it's not quite 2 minutes, but I'm going to leave it there. I don't know if there's really an awful lot of difference between things. Yeah, I see lots of people popping in some words there, which is great. Yeah. So this is about the observant and intuitive people, and generally the sort of sensing types describing an apple are more about, you know, the crispness, the color, the shape, what it would taste like. It might be about memories of real experiences evoked by seeing the apple, for example. There might be sort of concise and very specific. And your intuitive types are more likely to think things through in terms of maybe the links to myths and legends and maybe concepts. So you might look at, Adam and Eve or William Tell, that kind of thing, if you know all of that. So it's about what an apple is like in terms of perhaps associations, what an apple means in terms of perhaps innocence or temptation, um, and the intuition types tend to have descriptions that might be longer and broader and sort of show a string of ideas rather than just maybe, a few precise, concise words. So I don't know if any of you have been able to see your type in your descriptions of the apple. Might be entirely wrong. Generally, what happens is that people start off at the beginning of the 2 minutes to describe it in a certain way, and then they move into the other type of description. So, I don't know if you can see any of that or not, but often the two different types will describe what they're seeing in different ways. Um, Whenever I first did this exercise, it was describing Salvador Dali picture, and the two different types in the room essentially saw completely different things in the picture. It really, really struck me, because you had one group of people who were talking about literally the big picture. They could see, day into night, um, myths involved in it and things like that. And the other table of people were just going, I see a camel, I see a clock, and it really, really did strike me as, wow, I did not realize that people actually saw things in different ways. And it's about those two different preferences. So, you know, even in conversation with people, you can hear the different words that they're likely to use. So, if somebody's talking blue sky thinking and big picture and talking about the future and things, chances are they have an entirely different preference to somebody who's saying, yeah, but let's look at the reality here. Okay, so very different preference types. Okay, moving on to our third dimension then. Thinking and feeling. And this is about how we make decisions and cope with emotions. So, this aspect determines how we make decisions and cope with emotions. Thinking individuals focus on objectivity and rationality. You'd expect that whenever you hear those sort of words used, thinking individuals. Prioritizing logic over their emotions. They tend to hide their feelings and see efficiency as more important than cooperation. So they're all about the objective, the rationale, and looking at what needs to be done in terms of logic rather than about the emotions. Feeling individuals then are more sensitive, more emotionally expressive, and they're much more empathic and less competitive than thinking types, and they focus on social harmony and cooperation. Now, it's important to remember that people who have a thinking preference can also feel, do also feel, and that people with a feeling preference are also thinkers. Okay, so it's not one or the other, but it's where's your natural preference go. Okay, so you can see the difference here where you might have a feeling individual who perhaps has all the same information than the thinking one does, but they'll apply their decision making in a different way. They'll think, how's this going to affect the individual? How can I do something that's different that'll make it better for this person? Whereas the thinking individual is more like, well, here's the facts. If I apply these logically, then it'll be fair. Okay, so you can see the difference there. So again, thinking preference, you can get the recording on the Development Week site, probably by tomorrow. So the thinking preference then is about preferring to make decisions based on logical reasoning. They use cause and effect analysis, and they decide using impersonal criteria.
Róisín,
And then, yeah.
there's another question that is asking actually about your preference. Can someone's preference change over time?
Okay, I'll come to that just at the end of this. So the feeling preference then is about applying individual values. So not just looking at the logic, but what the values are as well. Understanding others' viewpoints. So they won't just take it from their viewpoint, but they'll look at how it might be affecting the other person as well, and deciding by personal circumstances. So all of the rationale, all of the logic might be very good, but maybe doesn't, apply to this particular person. So they'll always have exceptions that they'll be dealing with. Okay, so before I move on to the last one, then, can your preferences change over time? Some of the I suppose the trainer, certainly an MBTI, and that would say, well, no, they don't really change. But certainly my experience of things is, well, actually, there's quite a bit of flexibility in it. Um, it may be that your natural preference stays the same, but that you learn to do things differently, certainly in various circumstances when other preferences will work best for you. So you might learn that in the particular work environment that you're in, perhaps the feeling individuals doesn't go down so well, that you need your logic and you need your rationale. So you learn to do that more so. Doesn't necessarily mean that you change what your natural preference is, but you learn to flex and you learn to, I suppose, just balance across the two things. So it may be then that if you filled in the questionnaire again, if you were, older and that you did things differently, then you might sort of see that, you come up with some different answers or some different types. I would also say that within each, now the 16 personalities doesn't do this, but the MBTI does do this. Within each of those types, so say you're extrovert, within that extrovert, that's broken down again. And you may find that some of the things within that you'd be out of type. Basically you'd lean more towards introversion than you would extroversion. So as I say, even though you're going to have 16 different types here, not every ESTJ is going to be the same. You're all still going to be different, so there's still flexibility within those. So hope you understand that we're giving you these letters because it gives you an understanding of and gives you more awareness of how you like to behave, but we're not giving it to you as and this is how you are and this is how you stay. You flex around that, but it gives you a good knowledge about how you might do that. Okay, I've one more little thing exercise to think about around that particular thinking and feeling. So just have a think about this. And again, you can pop some things into the chat if you want to. It's just a little scenario that I want you to think, how would you deal with this? So you arrive home from work to discover that your elderly next door neighbour, who you get on very well with, has been burgled. The lock on the back door has been broken and the glass is smashed. Money and jewellery has been stolen. How do you help her? What's the first thing that you think to do? So again, if you want to pop anything into the chat, go right ahead. How do you help your next door neighbour? Okay. It's funny because those two things are the exactly the same things. Call the police, console the neighbour, and then in a different order, comfort the neighbour, phone the police. And bear that in mind, folks. Remember that. Call the police, ask if she's okay, phone the police, and calm her down. Okay. So great, folks, and a very good demonstration of this actually. And I don't know if it ties in with your type or not, but essentially, if you are if you have the preference for thinking, somebody's pursuing the burglar there. Don't do that. That's dangerous. Um, if you have a preference for thinking, then what you're probably going to do is try and protect, to sort things here, want to do the practical things, want to help someone by fixing the problem, tend to look at the practicalities and make a logical analysis of the situation, focus on the tasks. And so that's how you start off. So you might start with phone the police, maybe phone a glazier or something. And then you move into the comforting end of things. Whereas someone with a feeling preference is more likely to want to help someone by being empathetic and supportive, tend to explore how people feel in the situation and focus on relationships. So they'll probably start with the cup of tea, make sure they're okay, and then move on to the practical aspect of things. So it's not that you wouldn't do both of those things, but that you might automatically do them in a different order. So the thinking person likely to deal with the practicalities first, the feeling person likely to comfort the person first. And that was the way it came up in our first two comments. I don't know if that links with your type, with your style or not, but it was a good indication of how it can be different anyway. Okay, so moving on to our fourth one then, the judging and prospecting trait. And J&P trait reflects our approach to work, planning, and decision making. And this aspect reflects our approach to work planning and decision making, and the judging individuals are more likely to be very decisive, thorough, and highly organized. They're all about the clarity, they want predictability, and they want closure. They want to come to closure on things, and they prefer to have a structure and planning instead of spontaneity. So they want to be organized, they want to have everything just how they like it. The prospecting individuals then very good at improvising and spotting opportunities. They tend to be more flexible and relaxed non-conformists and prefer to keep their options open. So judging then, they like to come to closure. They like to make plans to have control or act in a controlled way. They prefer to act within a structure. So they need to have the sort of level of structure and prefer to have a schedule of activities. The prospecting person wants to keep their options open, keep a range of choices available to them. They want to be able to remain flexible, respond to emerging information. So they don't want to have that plan whenever something new might happen and they have to respond to that. Prefer to go with the flow and prefer to be spontaneous. Now, think about it in terms of our judging individual who wants all the structure and the planning. Going with the flow and being spontaneous is the opposite of who they are or what they want to be doing. And again, somebody who wants to be spontaneous isn't going to be happy with this is exactly how we need to do this. So you can see how the difference in terms of that working with other people, how it can make things very different for you. So one more little exercise then, folks, a very easy one. I want you to think about this in terms of tomorrow is the first day of the month. You have hopefully all your assignments and everything are over at this point, but unfortunately for this exercise, you have a project to complete by the 30th of the month, and you have enough time during the month to complete it. So you're not too pushed for time. You're moderately interested in something that you're quite interested in. What day do you start the project? What would all things being equal, tomorrow's the 1st, somebody's starting it today. Yeah, on the 1st. You're giving yourself a day then. You're starting on the 2nd. A lot of people at the beginning, quite a few people in the middle. On the last day, oh, TD, I don't know who that is. On the last day, smiley face. And that may well be the case for some of you. Okay. Thank you very much for that, folks. So, how wrong was I? This is my guess where most of you will be. So, if you are a J preference, you are likely to start around the beginning of the month. And if you have a P preference, more likely to be towards the middle or the end of the month. I didn't put the very last day in, but clearly I need to be doing that as well. So as I said, chances are if you're J preference, you will have chosen a date closer to the beginning of the month. And a P preference, oh, somebody started on the second. They've probably learned to not, not cut themselves out and leave themselves enough time to do it. Um, but but people with a judging preference, they tend to live in a planned, organized manner, and they try to avoid stressful last minute rushes. And then those with a prospecting preference prefer to live life a little bit more spontaneous and adaptable manner. And they enjoy keeping their options open and being curious. And they can actually feel energized by having last minute pressures. So, yes, we did get a smiley face with the do it started on the last day. But actually, if you have a P preference, then you may well be more likely to enjoy starting it late on. So, for example, the J preference probably likes to organize and plan for their holidays, whereas the P preference maybe will want to be more spontaneous and go with the flow, and they don't need a schedule and they'll just see what happens. So, now imagine those two preferences going on holiday together. It can work, but it requires some compromise, and exactly the same for work situations. And you'll certainly have noted if you've done group exercises that some people prefer to have that schedule and work continuously and consistently, and then some people want to just do this at the end basically, and that can drive people crazy on both ends of that. Um, but again, going into that work situation, that's going to be the case in lots and lots of situations that you're dealing with. So, how do you make sure that you can work with people who have different preferences to you? All right. So just be considerate of that essentially. Be aware that it happens and that they need to be able to, that you need to be able to work with different preferences. So assertive and turbulent then. Mary, do you want me
Yeah,
to
Róisín,
answer
sorry,
some?
there's a question that came in. It says, aren't they, the J preference, being very planned for their daily life, but not schedule and holidays at all, more like a P?
Maybe I said that wrong. I'm not sure. So the J would want to schedule, to be scheduling holidays, and the prospecting would want to not be scheduling holidays. So, to not be too organized about it. Maybe I said that wrong. I'm not sure. The other thing, so somebody had said that they are prospecting, but they would start it early on. As I said, again, it is spectrums. Um, and not everything about your life is going to be the same. For example, you might be really 100% on getting your assignments really well sorted and organized early on. But maybe when it comes to other things like, I don't know, doing the grocery shopping or something like that, you're not bothered about being organized about it. You prefer to just pop down and see what's available to you. So it's not necessarily going to be exactly the same in every aspect of your life. It's showing you preferences, a sort of an overall preference, but you can flex between those things and you may have learned to do some things differently. Okay. And the other thing is if you've come up with one of these letters in your report and you really don't see yourself in that, if you really see yourself on the other side of the spectrum, all you have to do really is to look at it and see, well, how does it fit into your life? If you're not agreeing with it, then look at what the evidence is in your own life and go with that, because it is all about your self awareness. It's not about what comes up in the questionnaire, it's about how self aware that you are. So, as long as you're looking at your own evidence honestly and thoroughly, then that's all you need to be doing. You don't have to, necessarily agree with everything that's in your report either. Okay, so the assertive and turbulent, spectrum then, as I said, it's a wee bit different to the others. It's not on the MBTI questionnaire. This trait underpins all the others, showing how confident we are in our abilities and our decisions. So it kind of is a coverall of the other preferences. So, showing how confident we are in our abilities and decisions. If you are an A, assertive, individuals are more self assured, they're more even tempered and resistant to stress. They refuse to worry too much and do not push themselves too hard when it comes to achieving goals. So it is about confidence in their own sort of abilities and in their own decision making and things like that. It's not necessarily the way that we would normally use the word assertive. So don't necessarily just pick it up in that same way. It's about confidence in their own abilities. Turbulent, and I really don't like that word at all, actually, but turbulent individuals are more self-conscious and sensitive to stress. They're more likely to experience a wider range of emotions and to be success driven, perfectionistic, and eager to improve. And I think that's the one key difference there is that you read there that the assertive person happy with the way things are generally, whereas the turbulent personality is more likely to want to continue to improve things. So as I say, it's an overarching trait covering all the others. The turbulent and assertive traits reflect our confidence levels and sensitivity to the criticisms and the opinions of other people. And that obviously then colours almost everything that a person does. The assertive persons generally gets the good press because we tend to use assertiveness, and I'll be training on that next week. As a this is what we're aiming for, folks. So the word assertive, and that's why I'm saying it's not quite the same way that we use it in other contexts. But boldness is generally seen in many cultures as an attractive and desirable personality trait. So turbulent personality then is, more likely to continuously strive to improve themselves and project that need to more positively develop into anything they're doing. So, they're going to try and make things better all the time. So not just developing themselves more, but also the things that they're doing as well. And they're likely to always be trying to make things better. And, who wouldn't want that kind of energy in your team? You want people who are always going to be striving to do things better and to improve things. So I would say it always helps to have the turbulent person on your team as well as the assertive person with, just enough doubt with the turbulent person to keep things real. They're more likely to see the problems and know what needs fixing way ahead of their assertive colleagues. So when you get your previous four letters, you add on to that your A for assertive or your T for turbulent. So it's ESTJA or ESTJT. So it's worth reading your report for the information included in it for this detail, because again, it's different for each of the types then. There isn't an overall, here's what T means. And whenever you apply it to your type, it means something different for each of the types. So it is worth reading your report through to get the detail on that. Any questions before I move on to the roles? Okay, folks. So now we know what type is and what each type consists of, but how do they fit together? So the system basically has two layers, and the first one looks at roles. So have a look to see where your type fits into the four roles here. And the four roles looks at our goals, our interests, and our preferred activities. So within each of those roles, you have four different types, and they tend to be, have sort similarities around what their goals are, their interests, and their preferred activities. So those types that share T and N, so thinking and intuitive, are our analysts. And our analysts are known for their rationality, their impartiality, and intellectual excellence. Sounds great, doesn't it? Everybody sounds great. Those types then that include intuitive and feeling are diplomats, known for their empathy, their diplomatic skills, and passionate idealism. And Mary, didn't we have a few people in one of our sessions who were diplomats and were planning to go into diplomatic roles? So
Yes,
that,
we did.
yeah, so that was
Perfect fit.
quite a good indication of how their type fitted in with the role that they wanted to be doing. But I would say, folks, that well, I think that was probably quite unusual. Don't be aiming for, if it says I'm this, then this is what I have to be. Okay, it just was quite unusual for that session. So those types then that have observant and judging in common are sentinels. And those personality types are known for their practicality and focus on order, security, and stability. And then finally, those types that share observant and prospecting are explorers, known for their spontaneity, ingenuity, and ability to live in the moment. And I think that sounds like the most exciting of the signs. And I have to say, I'm not one of those. And I think sometimes that whenever, I look at these different styles, I tend to admire the ones that do things entirely different to what I do. So, I don't know, maybe you only admire those that you see the similarities in yourself. But I tend to look at other people and go, wow, that's not me. I can't do that. That's something to admire. But that might just be me. I don't know. So it's always very interesting when, we do this for teams or in a big group to see the spread of personality types across the group and to see, if you're on your own, just the only person of that type, or if there's a number of you. Oh, what's happened to my screen here? It's gone different. Can I still move? Yes, I can. Okay. But it it's useful to be able to see if any of them are missing, for example, or if there's a lot of people in a particular area. So you might get lots of people, for example, up in this corner where you have lots of E's, extroverts, or you might get lots of introverts over here. Where is it that's missing from your particular team, for example? It's useful if you're doing this as a group exercise to see how you might maybe rub some people up the wrong way if you have a particular preference, or maybe why some individual rubs you up the wrong way. It may be that they like to do things in an entirely different way to you do. So it's just about that, self-awareness. Okay, so then just to look at some ways of flexing our styles, basically. And I really just want you to be thinking about these. We haven't time to go through these in any detail or anything. But when you know what your style is and you're aware that other people have their own personality style as well, you have to think about how you can actually make use of that. So here are just a few questions to get you thinking about it, about how that knowledge might be useful to you. So for example, if you were a manager, how could you make sure that, your introvert types in your team are heard? How would you make sure that those individuals are able to be heard within your team? If you were an introvert, how could you make sure that your input is heard and valued within the team? So if you're someone who's less likely to, in group meetings or something, to start to say how you're thinking about something, how do you get that message across if you're someone who's not terribly willing to do that? So, think about how you would deal as a manager or as someone with a particular type of preference, how you interacting with others, how you flexing your style and making sure that you're able to work across different styles. So how might an observant person work best with an intuitive person? And if you remember, the observant person is practical, pragmatic, down to earth, and the intuitive person more imaginative, more open-minded, and more curious. So, how might you work, be able to work with those sort of different type to what you are? And the first thing is to acknowledge that there is that difference and to make sure that you're aware that their preference is just as valid as yours is, and to make sure that you start to think about, okay, if this is what they need, then I need to talk about what I need from them, what I'm happy with, and what we can work through. Okay, so it's having that knowledge, first of all, makes all the difference. Another example then, you have two managers. One has a thinking preference and one has a feeling preference. Staff numbers have to be cut by 10%. Which manager would you ask to carry that out? And why might you ask that manager to carry it out? So again, to think about, well, would I ask the person who is going to look at the rationale and be logical about it? Or would I ask the person with the feeling preference who's maybe going to deal with the individuals in a very particular, empathetic way? You might also think about, well, what are the qualities that you as a manager have? What's your preferences? Do you need to bring in another preference type so that you can handle it together? Do you get people to work together because they have different preferences and might be able to bring both sets of preferences to the activity? So, again, just thinking about how your actual type might make a difference to how you work and how others work. And then my last example, how might a judging and prospecting personality manage to happily plan a big end of year party together? So what might the ground rules be and who would make those rules? And remember that a J preference likes to be organized and decisive and thorough, and they like structure. And then your spontaneous or your P preference likes to be spontaneous and doesn't want the structure, and they want to keep their options open and be relaxed about it. So how might those two people be able to actually, get on well enough in terms of their activities to be able to plan a big event together? So just some things to think around in terms of flexing your style. All of the information is in there, folks. You really just need to be knowledgeable about what your own style is and what the differences are for other people. And that's why I think it's important not just to know what it says in your report, but what it says about other people. What's the other end of the preference for other people as well? So that knowledge is important. So, how can your knowledge of these personality types help you to work with others? So, I said at the beginning that, self awareness is really no use to you unless you're prepared to put that knowledge to use. So, you can, take your questionnaire and skim through it and perhaps glean a little bit from it, or you can reflect on it and really see how it relates to you. And it might be something relatively small, but that can maybe have a big impact on you and on how you work. And I'll give you just a very small example from my experience. So I became very aware that because of my type, when I was interested and enthusiastic about something, I wanted to work on it there and then. And I would send out an email to a group of people asking for feedback. So I'm working on something, I'm sending out the email and saying, come back to me with feedback. And I would reasonably give them 2 weeks to come back to me because that's, the kind of the norm if you're able to. But then I'd start to get really annoyed whenever they didn't come back to me immediately, because obviously I'm enthusiastic about this thing now. And even though I've given them 2 weeks to come back to me, I want the information now. So I acknowledged that I was getting annoyed when people didn't come back to me. And it's a small thing, but it definitely made me more aware of why it causes me stress. And it made me wise to it, and I don't get annoyed by it anymore. I acknowledge that it's going to happen. So that one piece of knowledge, helped me to work with others, helped me to flex my own type. And it was, and also one of the biggest eye openers for me was that knowledge of how people see things in different ways. And now, if I wanted to, maybe put something together, if we were trying to look at, let's do something in the future, I would definitely want to get some people who are, big picture thinkers. Yes, I want to have people like myself who are more into the practicalities and the details, but I value the other side of the spectrum that I don't really flex enough, and I would want to use their skills in doing that as well. Okay, so before I get on to the interview questions, any comments or anything that I want to address? Nothing in the chat, Mary, that I need to address or anything?
This is just a technical question about opening the link to the slides that I had shared. Yeah.
Which one is it? Is it the PDF or is it the personalities questionnaire?
The PDF, I think it asks you to log into your Microsoft
Okay.
QED Microsoft Office, so that's the way that you have to get to it.
Yeah, it's only available for students, so you have to log into your account to be able to access it.
I just shared it as a reference for anyone who had to drop out of the meeting early, that they know they have access to it. So you should be able to log into it with your Queen's credentials.
Okay. So interview preparation then, just to remind you of the STAR technique for effectively answering interview questions. I always put this up here just to remind you to be trying to prepare your answers in this sort of way. So basically you want to be able to tell the interviewer your story by putting your answer into context for them. Remember, if you're there for an interview, chances are they've been interviewing lots of people for this role. They're asking the same questions of everybody, often getting a lot of the same sort of similar answers back. So you want to make sure that you're putting things into a very clear, concise context for them to basically making it easy for the interviewer, making it easier for them. So when you're formulating your answer for your interview, try and follow the STAR technique that you see here on the slide. It makes your answers clear and logical, and it means that you're getting across the main points that you need to get across to the interviewer. So start off by listening to the question. Think of the example that you're going to use. Hopefully you will already have prepared answers to these or to a similar question ahead of time. But even if you're thinking on your feet, frame your answer around situation, task, action, and result. Describe the event or the situation that you were in. Explain the task that you had to complete. Maybe talk about the challenges that were involved in it. Describe the specific actions that you personally took to complete the task. And, you can say what you did as a team, but you should also say what you personally did. And then finish with the results. What was the results of your actions? Were there benefits? Were there savings, cost cuttings? What was the impact of it? Okay, so that's the STAR technique. And then the questions. So, understanding your behavioral preferences. The interviewer is not going to ask you about your 16 personalities results or your Myers-Briggs results. I've already said to you that it shouldn't be used as part of a selection process anyway. But what you will want to be able to do is to look at what you know about yourself and apply it to situations usefully. So I've put together, quite a few of these sessions now, folks, and some of these questions do repeat themselves constantly. They come up in so many different sort of formats. As I've said to you, these skills are transferable across so many of the different sort of employability skills. But when you're talking about self-awareness, it goes across everything. So, for example, this first one also comes up in influencing skills that I'm going to be doing next week. So, just prepare your answers and put in the information that you feel is relevant to you and to the situation that you're describing. You don't have to be talking about, 16 personalities or anything. Just use the information that you're gaining from these employability skills sessions and put in what you think is important in the particular answers. So some of the questions then: describe a time when you had to adapt your style within a group to get the best outcome for all. So it might be something around the 16 personalities. It might be something around people who have no knowledge of a subject or something like that. It doesn't all have to be about this particular aspect of of the employability skills here. You know, look at these questions quite widely and look at how you would like to be able to answer them. Describe a situation where you were asked to do something that you had never attempted previously. Again, that might be stretching yourself beyond your comfort zone. It might be using a different preference to what you normally do. It could be a very wide question there. If we give you a new project to manage, how would you decide how to approach it? Tell us about a time when you had to deal with a conflict within your team. What did you do to help resolve the situation? And, you know, it may be that you don't have an awful lot of experience of conflict within the team. Think through something, you know, whether it's a group activity that you had to work to in, you know, in university. You know, it doesn't have to be a major conflict. People don't have to have come to blows. It may just be a disagreement, okay? So you don't have to have, I suppose, big standout examples. You just need to be able to show awareness of how you would deal with things. How do you plan to ensure you complete a number of tasks effectively? And that might be different for our judging or our prospecting people. How do you manage your time and prioritize tasks? You can see that some of these are similar. How do you ensure that you maintain good working relationships with your colleagues? How do you build relationships with other members of your team? Tell us about a piece of work you produced where accuracy was essential. Again, you can see that the different personality types prefer to look at things differently, and some might not be as concerned with accuracy. But you're not going to go into an interview and answer a question like that and say, "Oh, I'm not bothered about accuracy." Okay, so this is about awareness, but you're also using your own knowledge and skills to answer these questions to the best of your ability here. Give us an example of a situation where you worked under pressure. Again, something similar already up there. So a big variety of things there, because again, this one is about self-awareness. And it is about looking at things quite broadly and trying to get the evidence, more than anything else, the evidence of how you can support your answers to those questions there. So any questions, and remember you have myself and you have Mary, who's a careers consultant here to help with anything that you know, come up with here. It's a good opportunity for you folks. I hope you're not just all writing down the questions, because remember, you'll get this in your PDF. Sorry, Mary.
There was a add-on question for the person who couldn't open the file asking, are we able to email a copy of the presentation to them?
If somebody sends me their email, so my email is or.m.mccartney. And if anybody wants to email me for a copy of it, I will send it to them.
Do you mind if I put your email in the...
Absolutely not, no. Might want to stop the recording now, though.
Oh, yes.